my whole position right now is based on substance abuse prevention. And I know from speaking with people in the community that their grandparents and parents who've been addicted to opioids by accident. And these kids ask me, what do I do? And so, there aren't many options locally. So I struggle with what to tell them other than refer them to Valley Community Services Board.
Yeah. I guess my interest kind of lies in just the fact that, it's one of those issues that I, was surprised by the scale of, because it's not in terms of political discourse, it's not a divisive issue. We want to solve this crisis, no matter what side you are, but there seems to be certain things that have stopped us again and again from being able to solve something like this. And it's, it can be, and I've been trying to understand that, as I've done a little bit of research on it and written a couple papers, just from understanding, why this is something that, really seems...
has bitten the country.
Yeah. And I mean, and I've talked to some people about this, and, it is one of those things where, addiction, this is not just simply an opioid crisis, it's also an addiction crisis. We've already had, people have been addicted to drugs for a while, and it's sort of phased in and out of what sort of drug that is.
I think you're right. I know you're right about this has always been a problem. Addiction has always been a problem. I think we're discovering now that, like you say, it's a problem for many people, because it's not just the person who decides to participate in illegal drug use. It's your average Joe who hurts their back in a car accident or from a fall, and they get addicted to these simply because either they haven't been directed properly by their doctor or their pharmacist, or they ignore those, or some older folks who are suffering through dementia. I talked to a girl one day who, she said, my grandmother was suffering with dementia, and she overdosed herself on her prescription opioids. So certainly not doing it on purpose. And the young lady lost her grandmother to an opioid overdose.
Yeah.
And so as a community here, the Staunton, Waynesboro, and Augusta County community, they don't recognize it as being a problem, because we're reading about West Virginia and Ohio on the news. We're not reading about it being a problem in Staunton, Waynesboro, and Augusta County. So I think any bit of attention we can bring to it locally, whether it be on a policy level change or breaking it down to what's happening in your backyard, is definitely beneficial.
Obviously the worst areas are going to get covered, West Virginia, Ohio, but the thing is that those areas are not the only place that we're gonna have to solve this. I think a lot of people, they wanna feel like it's somewhere else. It's not happening in their neighborhood. It's not happening where they live. But the unfortunate fact is that it is, and it, and I think the media will focus coverage on the worst of the worst.
Sure.
So that's kind of why it's been shown to just, it's just West Virginia, it's just Ohio, it's just, name your state that you've heard about in the news recently.
As long as it's not your state.
Yeah, yeah. As long as Virginia isn't being mentioned, it's not something that people need to really worry about. But as we said, the thing about addiction is that it at some level it does not matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much.
Doesn't discriminate.
Doesn't discriminate. And we'll talk about this later, in terms of access and, people who are, don't have as much money, and that's obviously an issue, but this is just something that does affect everyone, and it can affect someone in your life right now. And you might not even know about it, due to stigma and stuff like that.
Well, one of the issues that we've had locally is the medication-assisted treatment. It's new to our area. There have only been 2 providers providing that, and they've been private providers, and I feel like people either didn't know about them or didn't think they could afford them. So now that Valley Community Services Board has opened up their medication-assisted treatment, that's the community's mental health and addiction place. That's where we refer people to. So I think the average Joe who thinks they can't afford some treatment is now able to get some treatment. And you're right, when we talk about socioeconomics, typically we think, oh, it's a drug problem, it's in a lower socioeconomic area, but you're exactly right about opioids. It encompasses everyone. I'm sure everyone can think in their brain and come up with someone that they know has been affected by opioids. Mm-hmm. And then from opioids, we read a lot about people who turn from opioids not getting their high to heroin. And then, heroin has a much darker side to it in terms of what people think. And it's, I would never inject, but yet people turn to that. They start crushing their opioids and then snorting those, and then they move on to heroin. And so then I think we have a much bigger problem because it becomes a bigger health risk in terms of hepatitis and HIV. Mm-hmm. So then you have a community who not only is worried about the opioid problem, the heroin problem, but these communicable diseases.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing is that this is a tough conversation for anybody to have, but I think it is one that needs to be had, because talking about it, and obviously we can talk about it all day. It's not, there are certain actions that need to be taken, but I think talking about it in a more open setting of, all right, this isn't someone's fault that they're addicted to opioids. This isn't someone's fault that they're addicted to heroin. I think that's a stigma that gets brought up a lot, and it keeps people addicted, because it keeps, if there's a stigma of you not being able to admit that you have a problem with this, you're far less likely to try to get help. You're far less likely to even go to Valley.
Right.
However good Valley and Services Board is, and I'm sure they're doing an amazing job with the drug assisted treatment. If we don't talk about it in a more welcoming light, people just aren't going to go. And I think we've seen that.
Right. Well, and I think many people consider substance abuse as a moral failing, and it's not a moral failing. It's a disease, and if we treat it like depression or diabetes or high blood pressure, and we talk about it like that, like this is a medical issue, we need to look at it in terms of it being a medical issue, and solve it with as much money as we're putting into these other medical issues, then I think we have a much better chance of solving it. We certainly can't arrest our way out of it, and that's often what's happening. You get put in jail for a couple days, you go through your DTs, you struggle, and then you're put right back out on the street and you still have your addiction. Yeah. So locally, we do have an adult drug court, which is really beneficial to the people who are invited to participate in it and who are willing to put the hard work and able to put the hard work in, because it's a strenuous task to be in drug court and to pass and to make it through successfully drug court. And I think everyone wants to put the effort into doing it, but their addiction is so strong that it's difficult. And drug court is a phenomenal option for people in our community, but it's a limited option. They can only take so many people. We spoke earlier about, making opportunities available for people. Locally, we don't have a residential facility. So for me to say to a grandmother who has custody of her kids, I want to send you 2 hours away for 2 months or 3 months for treatment, that's just not an option for her. She's already got custody of her grandchildren. So the fact that she hurt herself and now is addicted to these opioids, to send her to treatment is just not an option. So Valley opens up an option for her to keep her in the community for, not what private companies charge, but for a more realistic rate. Also, the new Medicaid expansion in Virginia opens up options for many people. Yeah.
Both of those have been super important. And I mean, another thing is that even someone, not just someone who's retired, but like, if you send someone away for 2 months, they're not going to have a job at the end of those 2 months. You can't tell someone who's trying to support themselves, you just won't have a job for 2 months, and you'll be paying a private company. You know, people that it's and then when you come back, it's not like it's unfortunately and while you're saying it is important to solve it like diabetes and stuff, it isn't entirely like diabetes or other things where it's not just you're not going to be completely cured after those 2 months. I think a lot of people want to believe that, and there's in private rehab there's sort of this idea that you'll be cured because it's a very commercially viable thing to say, like, oh, we're going to cure you.
Right.
You're going to be completely fine when you walk out that door, and that's not true. I mean, I don't think there's a way that we're trying to solve this out there that makes that true.
It's not a quick fix. There's got to be some step-down services in the community and some support in the community. I think talking about it, just like we're doing today, means we're introducing some employers to the fact that they may have some employees who are addicted. And how do we help, as an employer, how are you going to help your employee if they do have to go somewhere for treatment? I mean, I know folks in the community who've had to go places for treatment, and they've been lucky to come back and still have their jobs because that employer understood. That employer had a really positive interaction with them and relationship with them that let it be so they could go and leave their job for a month or 2 months and come back and still have a job, because that employer understood we're not talking about a moral failing, we're talking about an addiction, an illness. But I would venture to say the average employer wouldn't have that philosophy and would be, we're doing the best we can, but we can't hold your job for you for a month or 2 months.
Yeah.
So some big companies, I've read about big companies who hire folks who have struggled with addiction, and they pay for their treatment because they would rather keep those people as long-term employees than lose them to addiction. So it serves a purpose in their community. It keeps people gainfully employed, it gets people help with addiction, and it keeps the community afloat. Those are big companies who could offer those options, not your small plumbing company or your small electrician. So I think it has a lot to do with the employer's understanding of what addiction is and how they can help their employee work through that addiction.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It's not like diabetes where, of course, diabetes is a lifelong illness and addiction is a lifelong illness. You won't meet an addict who says they're cured. They understand this is a lifelong task for them. It's just going to be a lifelong struggle, and they, hopefully they have some supports in the community, doctors, counselors, NA groups, AA groups that they can fall back on when they do struggle. But yeah, it's not just a quick fix that you send them out of the community and send them home and all is well, because they've got to learn. They've got to make new friends, sometimes, cut ties with family members, which, you look at your family as your support group, and if you have to cut ties with them so you can be successful in your treatment, who's going to watch your kids now? Who's going to help you get a ride to work? So it's a twisted circle that as a whole, our community at least, can better serve our folks in the community that are struggling. But if they don't know about it, how are they going to support those people in the community? It's really hush-hush here.
Yeah.
So, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. So I guess I just kind of want to ask, like, what, just sort of what specifically has your organization been doing to sort of get people that knowledge about their options and get them into where they need to be in terms of
So GAPP
recovery?
GAPP is a substance abuse prevention coalition, and we primarily target youth. We do a lot of school interactions. We do parenting classes. We talk to the parents and the teens in the classes about all drugs in general, because we have those people who are addicted to opioids by accident. I was prescribed this for a back injury or something like that. And then we have folks in the community who start with marijuana or drinking, and they progress to pills and then to heroin. So we do a lot of education on both aspects. This is the illicit drug habit, and this is the average Joe who accidentally gets addicted. And we talk about both groups to them. You know, in the end, both groups are going to need the same sort of treatment. And we talk to them about, you know, contacting Valley Community Services Board as their option for, you know, when we refer someone there. We talk about what it means to be a healthy family, what it means to be in healthy relationships. So they have an understanding that it's not just what medication-assisted treatment can do for them, but what other aspects of the community can do for them. How do you know, if you don't have a supportive family, let's reach out and connect you with the people who can act in that manner. We do a lot of education at community events about what drugs we're seeing in the community, what resources are available in the community, and help identify parents and other guardians about, you know, what their kids might be seeing in school so they can talk to them about what they're seeing in school. You know, we know pills are in school. We know kids are bringing them to school. So we talk to the parents about, you know, letting their kids know what they might come across, what pills kids are passing around in school, what pills people are selling in school. Right now we're doing a lot on vaping because, you know, we're not raising a generation of tobacco smokers, but we're raising a generation of addicts because they're getting addicted to vaping. So, you know, to let them know
the nicotine still.
It is, right, the nicotine in them. So we want them to know that, you know, if we don't head this off at the pass, they could be going out finding more illegal, more illicit, more dangerous drugs. So there's some education to them on what we can do in terms of kids who are vaping, how the schools can participate in that solution, and how parents can participate in that solution.
Yeah. I think school is so important. You know, I mean, sometimes if we're thinking that we're going to focus all our efforts on, you know, sort of attacking the adult side of it, absolutely, that's important. But you talk about this, you know, illicit drug habit. You know, I think that's another thing where that's something where it's not going to start. It shouldn't start when they're addicted. It should start before they. Yeah. But I wanted to touch more on illicit drug habit, like because kids, you know, they have, you know, they're rebellious. I was rebellious.
Sure, me too.
to some level. How do you sort of show them that, hey, this is a really dangerous thing, and I'm not just telling you that because I'm an adult?
Well, we have some specific incidents in the community, unfortunately, that have occurred that we can point out to them, and it kind of lets them know that, you know, these were average Joes who have either been arrested for making, you know, bad decisions with regard to transporting drugs or making bad decisions with regard to doing the drugs. We also talk to them about, as a whole, what their school can do to you know, most of our schools have SAD clubs, Students Against Destructive Decision clubs. So we work with them to put on presentations in their school and have information tables to talk to the kids about, you know, it's not just, you know, pot's just not a puff here and a puff there and you'll be good to go, but what could happen if you continue? You know, that's not to say everyone who smokes pot's going to go down the line and become an addict and move into more dangerous drugs, but to give them an opportunity to see that it is a possibility. And, you know, starting with the vaping and alcohol or huffing, things like that, we really talk to them about that, you know, an addict in one aspect is still going to struggle with the same things that an addict in another, you know, whatever the drug may be, you're going to be struggling with it. So, and we really would love the opportunity to get into the elementary schools and talk to them. There are a couple elementary schools in neighboring counties that have after school clubs that they talk about drugs, and most of the kids come to the club because they're children of addicts and they want to know more about the drugs their parents are using, and they're afraid to ask their parents. So it's a really honest talk about some of the more dangerous drugs that their parents are using and what can happen. You know, not every school is ready to have that conversation with elementary school kids.
I mean, and I can understand why, you know, there's this, you know, it's a tough topic conversation. I guess what I would say to those people that are afraid to have that conversation in their elementary schools is that I think what people don't realize is that, you know, by the time someone's reached middle school, they've made a lot of decisions, you know, about themselves and who they're going to be. I think elementary school is the perfect time to really talk and have honest conversations with the younger kids about it. And I know people are, you know, afraid about, like, oh, well, you know.
Are we introducing or are we providing some education? Yeah. So that's a tough line. We walk that line all the time. Do we want to introduce them to some of these drugs that their specific kids aren't ever going to hear about? Or do we want to introduce it as a look, this is what's going on in our community, sometimes in your home. How can we do some education so that they're kind of paying attention? I have kids come up to me all the time and say, you know, my folks smoke pot. What do I do with that information? You know, and my, you know, it's a struggle to answer that question. You know, these kids are learning in school, you know, I shouldn't smoke cigarettes, shouldn't drink alcohol, shouldn't smoke pot. But my parents do those things. How do I talk to my parents about that? About 7 or 8 years ago, we had a bath salt situation in our community. And bath salts, you know, being the drug bath salts, not bubble baths that everyone thinks we're talking about. And we had kids in the community saying to their teachers, you know, my parents sell bath salts. And, you know, what is it? How can a teacher respond to that student? And how can they support that student without making that student think their parents are bad people? Because just because you have a drug habit doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who's made some difficult decisions. And so it's a really thin line between educating and introducing.
Yeah, but I mean, as you're saying, kids are already talking about it. Kids are already being introduced to it.
Right.
So I understand people's concern for that, but again, because this is such a silent problem, kids already know more than we think that kids do.
Agree.
Yeah, you know, and I think, at least for me, you know, people can have their own opinion. I'd rather have one kid who's in a high risk situation get the information he needs, over 4 kids maybe hearing about a drug for the first time. Like that is a risk I'm willing to take.
I agree. I think education has to start early. I think, locally our kids, you know, our elementary school kids ride the bus with middle school kids ride the bus with high school kids. So there's always some overlap in conversation, and, you know, my son could tell you in his middle school where the kids hide their cigarettes. And you know, he knew that in elementary school where they were hiding them in middle school. Yeah. You know, so when he gets to middle school, by middle school he knows where they're hiding him in the high school, because there's so much discussion about that. So I think, you know, educating early, and I agree with you, we'd rather get to at least one kid who's in a tough situation, who needs that information, you know, than that kid miss out on the opportunity to learn that. But I still don't know how to talk to a child who says, you know, my parents do drugs. Have you seen the video? It's a funny video. This little girl tells her teacher that her parents grow weed. And the parents get a note from the principal that says, you need to come in and talk. Your daughter tells us you grow weed. And they video the little girl, and she says, show mama where you grow the weeds. And the little girl walks outside, and she's literally just talking about weeds in the garden. But the school thinks she's talking about weed is in marijuana. Yeah, so, you know, she looks like she's about 3 or 4. Yeah. And it's a cute little video, but they're really kids going into school saying, you know, taking in, you know, their parents' marijuana that they found hidden somewhere and introducing, you know, what do we do with this? And so I think, you know, some education, you know, and maybe some parents aren't ready for that, but if someone, you know, is talking about it on their bus or in their elementary school, like you say, someone's going to hear it and they're going to know about it, and they know about it much sooner than we ever anticipated them knowing about it.
Yeah.
You know, the average age use for marijuana in Staunton, Williamsburg, and Augusta County is 12 years old. So your first puff of marijuana at 12 years old, that's a scary number.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people focus on purely like the physical addiction of certain drugs, but you know, with marijuana, at that young of an age, it's not just you're not just gonna
jonesing for it.
Yeah, it's not just you're not just gonna be jonesing for it, you know. And there's the research is still, you know, they're still wondering, you know, how much of a level you know, it's addictive, but it's also, it does affect
brain development. Totally.
Yeah, and that's I think it's a tough conversation to have in terms of any illicit drug. Is you're not just going to become addicted to it. How do you explain to a kid who doesn't at the end of the day doesn't care, you know, about brain development? How do you explain to them, you know, this will also affect other aspects of your life,
right, for the rest of your life,
beyond just being physically addicted? I think I honestly don't know how to have that conversation, answer that question.
And that's the conversation I often have with kids. When I start talking to them, I talk about how alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, you know, even energy drinks, if you consume them in an excessive amount or at such a young age, they will mess with your brain development. And we talk about how, you know, there's facts that say using marijuana at a young age can reduce your IQ points by 8 points. You know, when you show them the IQ scale, they're just can't believe that it could be reduced by 8 points based on smoking marijuana as a youth. And again, not every marijuana user goes on to use more illicit drugs, but I don't think there's anyone who can argue that smoking marijuana at a young age is good or healthy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to start with that conversation, I think is a good place to start about the brain development and educate parents on the brain development.
Yeah. This specific part of the conversation has been thrown into the political arena due to the idea of legality and decriminalization, which, you know, could be important for opioids, and we can talk more about that. But I mean, I think there are certain things where, you know, the conversation should be separated from, you know, can adults do this and can kids do this?
Very much so.
And I think that's somewhere where I think a lot of people will find that they agree on, you know, in terms of, you know, like for example, you know, we don't prescribe painkillers to children, you know, if they got a broken arm or something, because of that, you know, because the research has come out and shown that. So I think it's kind of a similar thing.
Well, and in terms of the painkillers, the pharmacies are being so much more careful with what they will fill in terms of...
Recently, though, right?
Yes, recently.
I was going to say...
In the last 8 months to a year, we've seen pharmacies come out and say, you know, we're only going to fill so many days of this. My doctor is in Harrisonburg, and the doctor's office, when you walk in, it says, if you're a new patient, we will not provide you with an opioid. And if you're a current patient, we will only prescribe you 7 days worth of opioids. After that, you need to see a pain specialist. So I think if we have more doctors who follow that path and are more responsible with their opioid prescriptions, I mean, I believe, I've seen incidents of patients being provided 90 pills for having their wisdom teeth removed. Yeah. You know, there's no legit reason for that. And I think doctors are really put in a bad situation where people are like, help me out, you know, I hurt. But I think doctors are becoming more aware. I think with all the talk about opioids, the doctors are becoming more aware, the pharmacists are becoming more aware. They're using the prescription monitoring program so much more now. And I think that is heading off some of this use.
But it's not, so just to be clear though, a doctor can still prescribe 90 pain pills
Yes.
legally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just wanted to
Yeah.
sort of have that qualified. Like, yes, it's awesome that these group of doctors are doing that. But anybody that's listening to this conversation, I would say, get in touch with your lawmakers and
Right. Very
talk
much
to
so.
them about, hey, don't allow doctors to, who are, sponsored by these big pharma companies to do this, because it's hurting my community.
Right. And then I think putting some of that pressure on those pharmaceutical companies. I see some states are suing the big pharmaceutical companies. I think they do have to take some responsibility in this, in terms of what they've allowed doctors to do and how they have advertised their medicine to doctors. Oxycodone was the big deal in the 80s and 90s. It's not addictive. Well, enough research shows us it's addictive, so we need those pharmacy companies to be playing some role in terms of how do we clean up communities? How do we clean out the doctors who are overprescribing simply for making the money?
Yeah.
And providing 1,000 pills for a couple $100, instead of doing it the responsible legal way, because there are these pill factories in communities. We've had one shut down in our area where people were coming from 3 or 4 states away to get this doctor to prescribe, hundreds, if not thousands of opioid pills to specific people, and they were getting cash underneath the table. So, hopefully those are few and far between, but the fact that it hit our area is why I'm aware of that.
Yeah. It's, and again, not completely, socioeconomic problem.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who lives just outside DC, and he had the necessary information to know what to do, but he got his wisdom teeth pulled out, and they gave him the pain pills, and he's like, there's like 30 of these. I don't need 30, because he was going to be fine after a few days, and he just tossed the pills out. But he was like, we were talking about it, and he was like, yeah, like if I didn't know that this was an issue, he's a smart guy, he had the information they needed, but he's like, I didn't know this was an issue, I probably would have done more, because he was saying, like, yeah,
why not?
Well, for him, he was like, yeah, they didn't really seem to be working, but I didn't want to do, more than 1 or 2 a day, because I knew the risks in that,
So then we have people who will take those, they may take them for 4 or 5 days, then they've got 20 pills left. What do we do with those 20 pills? Do they share them?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the drug take-back days. So the DEA runs 2 drug take-back days a year. They're in October and April. And across the country, there are about 2,000 sites where across the country we set up, and it's no questions asked. And so we set up in Staunton, Waynesboro, and Augusta County. Harrisonburg does it also. Yeah. Rockingham County does it. And it's no questions asked. You can bring your expired meds, your pet meds, your over-the-counter meds, and we take them. And it's a safe place to drop them off, and then they're taken to a DEA incinerator and they're incinerated. So across the country, they'll bring in tons of these unused, expired medications so that they're not sitting around in people's medicine cabinets.
Yeah.
Because if they're sitting around in your medicine cabinet, who's to say your teenage son's not going to bring some friends over and, look in the medicine cabinet and steal them out of your medicine cabinet and then sell them or use them. So the drug take-back days are really beneficial in our community. A lot of communities have permanent drop boxes, and we have one of those in the Augusta County Sheriff's Department. And it's a safe way to dispose of your drugs. It's unfortunately not something that people know about. We have people drive up on drug take-back day and they say, I've been holding these for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they've disintegrated. They've got a bottle of powder, but they didn't know what to do with them. So I think education of what to do with them, so they're not sitting around in your cabinet or available for other people to walk into your house, visitors, or you shouldn't give them to friends, because it's illegal to share your prescription drugs with someone who they've not been prescribed to.
Yeah.
So we educate the community on that. We educate kids on that. I think education is on the front lines, and if we can do that effectively, we might have a small chance of reducing the number of addicts we have in our community. And that's what the GAPP Coalition tries to do.